Overwhelmed by the urban scenery after such a long time, I entered the designated restaurant. Led by a waitress to a room, it seems I am the last one to arrive. I apologize for being late. Mrs. Smith, Jessica's mother, says with a warm smile, "Don't worry about it. You're still on time." Jessica, too, looks a tad nervous but manages to smile. She carries herself with the elegance of a true lady from a prestigious family, and I can't help but be mesmerized. However, one person doesn't seem pleased, her father. He sizes me up from head to toe and gives a disdainful humph.
Now that Tom's here, shall we begin blind date dinner?
Urged by my father, I took a seat next to him.
I heard you run a small diner out in the boondocks of Nebraska.
Jessica's father asks in a critical tone. Yes, that's correct. When I returned home, I was struck by the luxury of savoring fresh, local produce. So I quit my job at the posh restaurant in New York and decided to start my own place. Jessica and her mother seem genuinely interested in my story, but her father remains unimpressed.
You left a small town, graduated from a top university in New York, landed a job in a major company, and then decided to go back home to become a cook. I won't let my daughter marry someone from a bottom-tier family like yours.
Facing my outraged father, I was taken aback. So the claim that they were eager for this blind date was a lie. Was it just a ruse by my father?
Bottom-tier family, huh?
My father murmured.
I deeply apologize for my husband's rude remarks.
Jessica's mother apologized immediately. She also looks apologetic.
There's no need for you to apologize. My daughter, Jessica, is the future CEO of our company. We've raised her to marry someone worthy.
Her father retorts, standing up.
I only agreed to this dinner because you said it was a good match, but this is going nowhere. This blind date is over.
He shouts at his wife.
As far as I'm concerned, that's just fine. We can't associate with someone who looks down on my son's profession and background.
I respond, agreeing with my father but feeling a bit disappointed. Leading the way out, Jessica's father exits the room, with a hesitant Mrs. Smith and Jessica following him.
I truly apologize for making you feel uncomfortable.
Jessica's mother says regretfully as she leaves the room. I shouldn't have come to this dinner in such a carefree mood. It'd be impossible to get someone like him to understand my perspective on life. The town where I grew up had a population of just about 3,000. It was a typical small town. I spent my days running around fields, climbing mountains, catching bugs, swimming in rivers, and playing from dawn till dusk. Things got a bit more convenient when an interstate passed through our town, but our way of life remained largely unchanged. My grandparents, whom I lived with, were farmers, so I often helped with the harvest. But my favorite times were spent cooking.
This is how you remove the stem from an eggplant?
My grandmother or mother would teach me as I helped out.
Tom, the food you make is so tasty.
My family would praise, making me yearn to learn and cook even more. I always thought I'd spend my entire life here. That changed when I got to middle school. My sister traveled 2 hours to high school, while my brother went off to a school in Chicago. Whenever my brother, who had moved away, returned home for holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, I'd hear about his life in the city, and it made me long for that urban lifestyle. I want to attend a high school in New York. When I shared my feelings, my parents, seemingly prepared for it, respected my decision. I then enrolled in a high school in New York City with a dormitory. Having studied in the calm atmosphere of the countryside, I was taken aback by the pace and culture of the city school, but I put in every effort to catch up. All the hard work paid off, and I made it to a top-tier university. While enjoying city life, I managed to maintain a balance between fun and studies, which eventually led me to land a job at a leading company. Living in the city was supposed to be my dream, but it wasn't. all I felt was suffocation. The tense interpersonal relationships, the constant noise, the feeling of always being rushed, it was crushing me. Yet, I felt I couldn't go back home. After coming this far, I felt like there was no turning back. My turning point came when I visited a fancy restaurant for a business dinner. It's delicious. In that moment, I felt a longing to create such dishes myself. I remembered how much I used to love cooking. I quit my job and decided to attend culinary school. After obtaining my cooking license, I began working at a restaurant in the city. Starting off was tough. I was relegated to tasks like cleaning, shopping, and dishwashing. And just when I thought I'd get to cook, I found myself peeling carrots day in and day out. But gradually, I was trusted with more. Prepping fish and meat, frying, grilling, boiling. After a decade, I finally became a recognized cook. Now, I can hold my head high when I see them. With that thought, I returned to my childhood home with high spirits. My sister had moved out after getting married, and my brother settled down in Chicago after finding a job and getting married there. My grandfather and mother had already passed away, leaving only my grandmother and father behind. The once lively and cramped house now felt empty and vast. My grandmother, now in her 80s, was still active and tending to her garden, and I decided to help her with the harvest. Cooking with the freshly picked vegetables, I was amazed at their taste. It was entirely different from the ingredients at the restaurant. I was deeply struck by how much flavor one can bring out by harvesting seasonal ingredients and cooking them immediately. Even though I had tasted this from a young age, I had completely forgotten. I want to open a small diner here. While surprised, both my grandmother and father happily accepted my proposal. I thanked everyone at the restaurant, especially my head cook, and left New York behind. I returned to my hometown to start the second chapter of my life. Aiming for local sourcing, I collaborated with local farmers for ingredients, experimenting to create the perfect dishes and setting up my diner. Of course, things didn't take off immediately. In the beginning, only a few local elderly folks would stop by, making the diner almost eerily quiet. Thankfully, with the rise of social media, even a small diner in the countryside can reach a global audience. I started posting photos of my dishes on Instagram, shared the cooking process on Facebook, and tweeted cooking tips. Additionally, I uploaded shirt recipe videos on YouTube and TikTok. From there, folks started following me, visiting my diner, leaving comments, and even promoting the place on Yelp or their blogs. It wasn't just locals. With increasing numbers of tourists wanting to experience the real America beyond just big cities like New York or LA, the number of foreign tourists traveling to the countryside is increasing. People like that see my posts on social media, visit the small eatery, and then share about it on their own social media, spreading the word. The traditional American cuisine was praised, and due to the influx of visitors to my diner, even local inns and souvenir shops saw an uptick in business, and I've been thanked for this indirect contribution. During this time, my grandmother suggested a potential match for me.
Tom, you don't have to if you don't want to, but it might be lonely staying single forever.
I've always wanted to get married, but approaching 40, I started to feel something like resignation. I was taken aback looking at the arranged marriage photos and profile. She worked for a major company and was quite the beauty. I wondered why she'd want to marry someone like me when she could easily find someone better. She's way out of my league. That's what I said, declining the offer. But my grandmother insisted, saying the woman was quite keen. So I agreed to meet her. Later, thinking I might as well make the most of my trip to New York, I decided to show my father around. I took him to a fancy restaurant I used to dine in frequently and introduced him to everyone. It felt good.
You don't miss living in the city anymore, Tom.
Asked by my father, I replied with a smile, not at all. Even if some folks might laugh, I feel more fulfilled now, running a small diner in countryside. Sure, it's lonely without a partner, but it's something I've come to accept. One evening, when I returned to my parents' house, the phone was ringing. Grandmother was in her room and seemed not to hear it. Hello. As I walked from the entrance to pick up the phone, a desperate voice cried out,
Please, would you consider another blind date? We'll come to you this time.
It was Jessica's father. Wasn't it you who called off the last meeting? Confused, I responded, and the man explained. He seemed flustered when he realized that my grandmother was a major shareholder in his company. We inherited some land from our ancestors, and when a highway was being built, we received a considerable amount in compensation. My grandfather used that money to invest in stocks and other ventures. When grandfather passed, grandmother inherited those shares. My grandparents are on my mother's side. As my dad had a different last name and didn't take on our families, Jessica's father never imagined a connection. Didn't you want to avoid getting involved with a bottom-tier family from the sticks, did you? Upon my sarcastic remark, her father was extremely apologetic. Just then, my grandmother appeared. Grandma, was I too loud? I'm sorry. Apologizing, she indicated she'd take over the call.
I've heard the story from Lisa and Jessica. After all the effort to arrange the meeting, you went and ruined it.
My eyes widened at grandmother's words. I learned from grandmother after that. When she had attended a foundation party for the company run by Jessica's father, she had greeted him and his wife. It was their first time meeting with her after the shares had shifted from my grandfather to grandmother. The CEO left his seat early, but grandmother continued chatting with his wife. Jessica joined in, and grandmother mentioned, I have a grandson about your daughter's age. She spoke about me, my return to hometown, and my diner. Following that, Jessica and her mother visited my diner, loving the food. During that time, her daughter was drawn to the way I worked, and after she told her mother about it, the topic of this blind date came up. When I found out that my grandmother wasn't lying about the other party being very interested, I felt an uncharacteristic warmth spread across my face despite my age. I felt embarrassed, realizing that such a beautiful woman was actually interested in me. 2 weeks later, welcome. I cheerfully greeted the guests, but my words got caught in my throat. There stood Jessica and her mother.
My apologies for my father's rude behavior the other day. We wanted to apologize sooner, but things got busy.
It was a busy time in the diner, so I asked them to come back after closing hours.
My husband and I are getting a divorce, and I'll be taking over the company.
Jessica's mother's revelation was unexpected. The company was originally run by her father, and her husband had joined the family. Even after taking over the company and becoming the CEO, he acted as if the company was his own personal property and was domineering at home. Mrs. Smith endured it for years thinking of her daughter, but decided to divorce after this matchmaking event.
He was thinking of Jessica as the next CEO, but I believe Jessica's life is for Jessica to decide.
Hearing those words, Jessica stared intently at me and talked to me.
Would you consider dating with marriage in mind with me if you're okay with it? Come. I want to know more about you.
My grandmother, sitting next to me, slapped my back hard.
Tom, why don't you reply like a man?
Please, it's my pleasure. Everyone cheered at my response.
I will do my best to support your business, Tom.
Jessica, smiling happily, looked as beautiful as a flower. Feeling immense happiness, I swore deep down that I would lead a happy life with her.